Hello and welcome again. This is Fantasy Grounds Academy, and I am Fantasy Grounds Academy founder, Leroon. I'm here to bring you some information and some tools and some things to consider when you are building maps or importing them. So we're going to import some maps from a third-party source. I was going to use the DM's Guild and such, but I thought I would revisit the Dungen app. This app is basically kind of free on a certain level, but you can go to a patron and subscribe so you have more access to different features. This is a friend of ours, Nick. He does the programming for this, and I think it was a very cool project. Although I think he's been pretty busy. I think he has a new child now, so he hasn't been working a lot on it. But nonetheless, it's a really cool app, and it kind of speeds up the process of generating a kind of a generic map. So this is dungen.app/dungen. It's with a GEN. I put that in the description on the links at the end of the show that'll be on there, as well as the Patreon. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a map with this dungeon generator, and you have to be a patron in order to benefit from the output or the export of the map. Okay, so he has some themes to choose from. So if I use the drop down, you can do an ice temple, you can do a stylized gray look to it, paper white, stylized white, classic blue like the old D&D dungeon crawl, a virtual world, or you can actually get the mask for it, which will give you the background area. So it's really a very helpful tool if you use this. The other thing is the size of the dungeon. So for Fantasy Grounds or most VTTs, medium is probably about the largest map that you want to put out. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to do any of these settings yet, but I'll go ahead and hit generate. And it's going to make a pretty good size map. That's pretty huge for Fantasy Grounds. That's probably 2 to 3 times larger than you'd want it to be. So take that in consideration when you build maps. Don't make them too large, because what will happen is when you import this to Fantasy Grounds, it's going to drive you bananas because it's going to be too big and you're going to be scrolling and in and out and all those sort of things. So this would probably be about the maximum size. I would actually go down to tiny because I've used this app before. And then your resolution you can pick from is 50 for Fantasy Grounds. You can do 70, which is in the middle, and 140, which is high res. And that's also something you would use in an app such as Roll20. So I'm going to pick the 70. I think that's a good balance between high and low quality. And then for dynamic lighting, what this does is it allows you to generate dynamic lighting definition files with this rendering. So I want to change the stylized map to probably a ice temple, which is one of my favorite presets. Or you can go with original, which is like a brown. Let's go ahead and do that. And then this drop down here, you would click on Fantasy Grounds line of sight. And what this does is it exports a separate file that has all the definitions for the walls. You still have to put in the doors and such, but at least it does most of the walls for you. And the fact that it's, it really, it just makes things a lot funner. So you have multi-level. So if you want, egress or places where you can go up or down, you can click that. And then special rooms, this is in beta, but this would be like a boss room or some kind of trap. Once you're done with that, you go ahead and click generate, and I'll do the multi-level, and then I have it on tiny. That way the map's not too huge. So between mini, small, and tiny, that's pretty much where you'd want to use for creating maps for Fantasy Grounds. You can always come back and generate more than one, but I think it's easier to manage and to use in Fantasy Grounds if they're not too complex, because like this is a little bit much. So I'm going to hit generate. And what I get is something like this. This is exactly what you'd want to see for a Fantasy Grounds map. This is perfect. And you got these little side rooms, and you got an area where you can go up or down, or an entryway, and then you have these little passages. So this is perfect. I really like this. This is what you'd want. And it gives you the dimensions down here in the tile below, so that's helpful. So when you're setting it up in Fantasy Grounds, you already know that it's 70 pixels, and you will already have line of sight definition. So once you've done the generation, there's a download button. So I'm going to hit download, and what that does is it downloads the file. So on my hard drive is the file itself now. At this point, if you wanted to, you could dress it up or whatever you want to do. If you have assets outside of Fantasy Grounds, you can use those, edit it any way you want. I'd leave the dimensions the way they are, but you can put in assets or maybe a little bit of discoloration, whatever you feel is necessary. It does generate the patron and the name of the channel. I don't mind that. That's just part of the game, and if you really don't like that, you can cover it up with an asset. So I'll go ahead and close this for now. And then the next step is to generate the dynamic lighting based off of this image. So the tiles are 23 by 27, so that's perfect. Usually with Fantasy Grounds, you don't want any more than 30 by 30, and that would be the actual dimensions of this particular map as far as squares go. So for each square, it's 70 pixels, and there's 23 by 27 squares if you went from left to right, up and down. So that's what that's saying. So I'm going to download the definition file. The definition file is just basically a way for you to have the actual line of sight partially done for you. It's an XML file. So you have the image and you have the XML. So that's basically what you do with the tool is you can play around with this and you can pick the different themes and such. And if there was a seed for it, like a number, you can actually generate it, give someone else the seed so they have the same number. And this would also allow you to save the seed so that if you wanted to generate this map again for some reason, you would have it. And the seed is right here. This is 311-80208. So this looks kind of like an Egyptian temple, so I might theme it that way once I put it in Fantasy Grounds. So this is just a preliminary step that you would use for creating content. And if you don't, you kind of run into out of time, or you don't have the, you got to get writer's block or whatever you want to call it. I think that's an important tool to have once you've, started playing with Fantasy Grounds and you want to check out some features. Now there are other map programs out there that will do something similar where they'll export the XML file. I'm pretty sure Dungeon Painter Pro on Steam does it, and there's one other app that just recently added the capability. It's one of the virtual tabletop forge type programs. I can't remember the name of it, but nonetheless, this is just a real quick and dirty way to generate a quick map. I really appreciate this, and the simplicity of it makes it so much easier. So now what I'm going to do is go to Fantasy Grounds, and I'm actually going to import it. So I'm going to leave my screen up to show you the process. So right now I'm in Fantasy Grounds. I have the program up. I just have in my library, I have the SRD loaded just in case. I don't really need it, but I have it there. And then I'm going to go to Assets. And the Assets folder is where all your images and maps are stored. So right now there is a data folder, which is basically the higher level or the top layer of where all the folders are for Fantasy Grounds on the master level. I want to make just a map pack or a map set for this campaign. There is no campaign folder yet, and that's because I haven't added any content yet. So if I click on folder on the bottom, it's going to open up this area, which is blank. It just says images, but it's inside of my campaign. The campaign is called Importing a Map Fantasy Grounds Unity. And if you go to the master level, that's where the main directory is. So I'm in campaigns, and then I was going to go to this import line of sight campaign that I was in. So there's all kinds of tutorials that I've worked on, and you see I got a ton of campaigns. But this is how you would basically create content and generate things to help you with your campaigns. Otherwise, you're kind of at the mercy of just getting content that's in the modules, which is not bad because they're already done for you. So anyways, the campaign folder is called Importing a Map FGU. So what I'm going to do is go to my hard drive where I downloaded this stuff, and I'm going to transfer that over into this folder. I'm just going to copy and paste this over, and in this image folder, I am going to take a look at this. So I only have an images folder right now. I don't have any other folders, but if you want to add tokens or portraits, you would add those image folders. So in images, I'm going to take and make a folder. So I'll call this properties. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this Dungen Maps, just so I have a subdirectory of the images folder in case I bring in different image types. Now, once I'm in the Dungen Maps, now I'm going to make another folder, and this one is going to be called, I'm going to call this a Egyptian temple because that's what I thought it looked like. Even though it may not be, it just looks like a temple. So maybe I'll put temple instead of Egyptian. That way it's not so, and I'll say temple map. Okay, so once I have that, now I'm going to double click and I will be in this folder where this stuff is stored after shortly because I'm going to take and move the view. So I'm going to go to OBS and turn off this large view, but I wanted to show you the directories I was in. So I'm going to go ahead and close this particular window, and now we'll just be in Fantasy Grounds. So I'll switch over to Fantasy Grounds, and what we're going to have here is I'm going to click this folder button, which is down here at the bottom in the assets window. That brings up the subfolder, and then I got to navigate to the folder that I created for the content. Now on my hard drive, I'm going to go to the folder where I downloaded those files, and they both need to reside in the same folder. So in other words, if you download the definition file, it needs to be in the folder with the file name. So at this point, you do not want to change the file name. You want to leave it the same because it will match up with the XML file that you want to import or use for this particular map. And I'll show you that shortly. So I'm just copying and pasting this into the subfolder or Fantasy Grounds. And that includes the image and the actual XML definition file. So it's not going to show in Fantasy Grounds right away because it needs to be refreshed or it needs to re-look at this. So as you can see in the assets area, there is no other folder here. The assets folder doesn't even show up yet for the campaign. So once you hit this refresh folder assets button, it will create the folder, which it did. Now there's a campaign folder. So that doesn't exist until you put content in it. And now I'm going to double click, and there's my subfolder for Dungen Maps. And then in there is the temple map that I had defined. So here's the temple map. So if I double click this, this is the preview of it. At this point, I could add it as a background image if I wanted to, or I can set it as a decal, or, that's basically what I've done here, and then create an image record. So that's what you're going to want to do. Or you can drag this into a new group in your images and maps folder. So I'm going to open up images and maps. Now I can drag this over now or send it over through here, or I can import it from this images area, but I'm going to just go ahead and drag the content over. So I can add it from here, or I can drag the image from the folder over to the images area. It's the same thing. So I'll close the preview window. And when I drag this and drop this over into this images folder, it'll open up in a image window. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this drop down. I'm going to make a group just so it's organized better and it's not just miscellaneous. So click add category and it calls it group 1. That's the default. I'm going to click the edit groups and I'm going to retitle it. I'm going to call it temple map, just so I have some organization and it will have a place to go. So now that I'm done, I'll get out of the edit mode and I will select temple map. Even though there's nothing in there now, this is where it's going to be stored in the group. So now I'm going to take this image and drag and drop it into there, which is the images area. And when I do that, after a couple seconds, Fantasy Grounds will bring this up and it will basically add it into the area that you want it. So this is basically the file, and here's the actual map. And now that I'm done with that, I'll close the images for right now. And now I'm going to take a look at this here and see what it looks like in Fantasy Grounds. So it's not too bad. So what I will do is, first of all, I can right click on the map and I want to get it more centered. So you click view and you right click on the map, you click view, and I'm going to do zoom to fit. And that brings the map up to front and center. You get a good look at it. Now the title here is the file name. Now do not change the file name in the actual directory, but in Fantasy Grounds, I'm going to put temple map, or actually map, temple. And that way it will stay organized in that list view for the maps and images. And then on the right, I might call this the something that has to do with the lore. So I'll just say this is the mummy's temple. So we will have an Egyptian theme. And then over here on the right, I'm just going to put old temple, or ancient temple is a better word. And what that does is it hides the true name of the file, or I don't want them to know the mummy lives there. Not yet. And I'm going to take the identification and turn that on. So that way, when the players play, when I right click on the map and I click sharing and I share this record, they're only going to see this ancient temple. They're not going to see mummy temple. They don't need to know the boss is here. So that's just a little side thing. So now that I'm in this actual map and I'm going to edit it by unlocking, you look over to the right, there's different assets. So I'm going to go to the line of sight, which is this brick wall. And as you can see, the line of sight's already there. I didn't have to do anything. It automatically plotted all of the locations for me. I might have to edit it because I might want to put a door here, but basically it's already done the line of sight. And that's pretty handy. It speeds up things. You might have to alter it a little bit, but that really in a pinch, when you need a quick dungeon map, that's pretty simple. It takes you like 10 minutes to do it. And then as far as editing goes, depending on how much stuff you want to add, that will add more time to it, obviously. But in a pinch, that's a really quick way to generate a dungeon map. It's something that I think would be helpful for most people that are in our community. I think that it is a great tool. If you want to join his Patreon, you're welcome to. I'm not here to advertise, but he does have his own Patreon to keep this project alive. And then I would really recommend playing around with it and having fun with it. But again, you have to be a patron to get the XML file. You can get the map for free. You just won't get the definition file. So that's something I wanted to warn you about. So that is basically how this is being used to help people and to make a quick tool. So especially if you're playing like classic, like D&D classic, that's what you want. That's because you can generate a map that looks like the old school blue and white, and that would be really cool for old school D&D stuff. And even new school stuff. I mean, this is good for anything. So that with that in mind, you can do whatever you want. Let's say you wanted to add a door. So if you're not familiar with adding line of sight, this is pretty much the real basic part of it. But if you want to actually create something, then you might want to add this. But see, I see this might be a little goofy here because of this. So you could technically move this if you wanted to. It kind of made a weird anomaly, but it's not going to hurt anything, so you don't have to do that. But if you're going to, you would just snap this to grid and move this over, and there you go. So that was an artifact left over from how it generated the actual area. And now you have this thing all set up and ready to go. Looks pretty good. So if you wanted to add doors, you could do that. But I think what I'm going to do is actually add some assets. So if you wanted to make this a little bit cooler, you can go into your assets folder and add things, whatever you might have. So I'm going to go just add one asset. So I'm going to take and click on the door, or the stamp tool, which is layers. And then I'm going to go to my assets folder. And I'm going to look for some urns and vases. I know I have an Egyptian set in here, so maybe I'll go with a mummy or a sarcophagus. Let's go with see if we have a sarcophagus. Not exactly. So let's try some urns. Do we have an urn? Yeah. So it's looking through all of these folders. So just got to give it a couple seconds to go through and curse through your library, especially if you have a large amount of content like I do. I've probably got about 30 gigs worth of assets that I need to go through. So you can go through here and see if any of these fit your needs. So that's something you may want to check. So I think I'm going to go with this display case. Or maybe I want to add a table, or it could be anything. So it depends on what you're into. So there's a lot of different assets that I have here where I have to go through. And so here's some assorted pile of things, some furnishings. There's a rug, perfect. So I'm going to drag and drop the rug up into this area. And at this point, if I want to rotate it, I could. So I will rotate it. So now it's 90 degrees. And then when you're done with that, I'm going to place it on the map. So let's say it's in this room here. So if I click that, if you notice, it's huge because I didn't look at the size of the asset before I placed it. So what I'm going to do is click here on the actual asset, and I'm going to make sure that it's highlighted. And then I'm going to go to the selection tool, and you can hit the shift key or the control key or alt, and you can shift this down to whatever size you want it. Or you can come up here and let's make this a 3 by whatever. There we go. So now it's not too herkin and it'll fit. And then at this point you can also rotate it since you have it selected. You can rotate the carpet. So you can add things to your map and make it, a lot more interesting than what you normally get. So anyways, that's what I wanted to show you. It's a quick way to get line of sight in here. So if I go back to line of sight, this will add all the different walls, and then the rest of it you have to flesh out yourself. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. Take care, everybody. Happy gaming. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you around.